Listen to a team of journalists from the Washington Post, which, by the way, won 6 Pulitzer Prizes this week. They spent over a year producing a long series of painstaking reports on farm subsidies.
What happened was, one guy down at the end of the table mentioned, well, you should go look at these mansions out on these old rice fields. They're collecting government payments because they were built on these old rice fields and they qualified.
You'd be able to live on the 1 acre and collect government payments on the other 9 acres.
Armed with names and addresses, Sarah Cohen was able to cross-reference them with her database of 217 million payments from the USDA. She began to identify who was getting subsidies and how much it was costing taxpayers. Among the USDA payments Cohen found was nearly $500,000 that had gone to a Texas physician for his 10,000 acres of former rice land.
This is supposed to be a safety net, but it's not a safety net. You're not saving anybody. You're saving a surgeon in Houston.
The Post would report that in Texas, as recently as 2005, $37 million was paid out to owners whose land was once planted with rice, but is no longer. In fact, the state now had more former rice land than current rice land. On July 2, 2006, the Post published the first report in a series called Harvesting Cash. The investigation into direct payments found that nationally, more than $1.3 billion over 6 years had been paid to people who were doing no farming at all. The Post didn't just identify over $1 billion for farmers who don't farm. They would soon uncover hundreds of millions in drought relief where there had been no drought. In 2002, the White House and the USDA came up with a $750 million fund to aid ranchers and dairy farmers who suffered economic damage from drought. It was called the Livestock Compensation Program.
They removed the restriction that there actually had to be a drought and said that any kind of declaration would make the counties eligible for funds in the second year.
So quite often these programs are just ways to get money into rural areas, and not, does this make good policy sense? Is this a good policy?
The Post found that all told, $635 million went to livestock owners across the nation who suffered little or no damage from drought. And that $635 million was just a drop in the bucket of Farm Bill misspending that the Post uncovered. The paper's findings included $3.8 billion corn farmers got in subsidies in 2005 by simply playing the LDP. That is, collecting a subsidy when corn dipped below its floor price, then selling when the price went up again. $9 billion in disaster payouts to farmers, most of whom were already covered by subsidized federal crop insurance. And $400 million worth of powdered milk, millions of pounds of it, the government gave away free to feed cattle during a drought. Instead, ranchers, feed dealers, and brokers made millions by selling it in Mexico, the Netherlands, New Zealand, and the Philippines. Tallied up, the Post had identified over 15 billion taxpayer dollars spent on what it called wasteful, unnecessary, or redundant expenditures.
American farmers are going all out to meet the worldwide demand for food and earning record prices for their efforts, as they should. Farm income almost doubled last year and is now reaching an all-time high. With grain prices skyrocketing and the federal deficit out of sight, this would seem the moment to cut back on those tens of billions of dollars that taxpayers shower on milk producers, cotton and rice farmers, and growers of corn, soybeans, wheat, and sugar. Subsidies that keep coming whether they're needed or not. What was supposed to be a temporary financial safety net for imperiled family farmers has become a huge boondoggle for a fraction of wealthy farmers, including landowners who've never gotten close enough to a barn to slip on the manure. But you don't have to take my word for it. Listen to a team of journalists from the Washington Post, which, by the way, won 6 Pulitzer Prizes this week.
For Ed Gangle, a tenant farmer who has worked these fields for over 4 decades, there is less land to grow rice on every year.
All this here was in rice for the last, since World War II.
He used to farm this field, but it's not for rent anymore.
One of the troubles with the farm program is it's a hodgepodge. It's not one program. A loan deficiency payment, the livestock compensation program, price support, subsidized crop insurance, disaster relief programs. So it's one program kind of layered on another.
With the LDP, farmers can collect a subsidy when the market price of their crop dips below a government-set floor price. This way, when prices are low for crops, the government steps in and makes up the difference. But, Morgan learned, there's a way to make a killing on the LDP.
You can get the subsidy, pocket the subsidy, wait for the price to go up, and then sell later. There's big money in this. I made me scratch my head a little bit because I said, isn't the LDP supposed to compensate farmers who are losing money?
The Post began its investigation by examining a kind of subsidy born in 1996. The Republican-controlled Congress, critical of what it termed big government, wanted to wean farmers off subsidies and to encourage them to grow whatever the market demanded. But to get votes, the reformers had to make trade-offs, with farm state congressional Democrats and Republicans bent on maintaining payments to their farmers. The result was a classic Washington compromise. One kind of subsidy was ended, but in exchange, a new subsidy was created, one that paid farmers not for the crops they grew, but for the land they owned. That compromise now costs taxpayers billions.
The taxpayers spend more than $5 billion a year paying farmers not on what they grow, but on what farms grew in 1996. They took a sort of a snapshot of American farms and said, how many acres, if you grow 100 acres of corn, those are your base acres. And we're no longer going to tell you what to plant on those acres. You can plant corn, you can plant nothing. But we're still going to send you a check to support your income.
Dan Morgan wanted to know more.
I nosed around up on Capitol Hill and found a guy, a member of a staff, who said, you ought to go down and look at rice production area near Houston. People are being paid down there. They're getting checks for the government covering 500,000 acres of rice. But guess what? There's only less than 200,000 acres being grown now, and yet they're still receiving these payments.
Morgan and his colleague Gil Gall headed for rice country to investigate. In El Campo, Texas, they met Ed Gangle, the rice farmer who can no longer rent the land he used to farm.
It's just another example of what's happened to the Texas rice industry.
Yeah.
No one farms here now, yet the owner still receives a subsidy, what's called a direct payment, from the feds.
On this farm, he's receiving somewhere around a little over $10,000 for not having a farmer out here. He runs his own cattle on it. He can do that or lease it out or actually do nothing at all with the land and still be better off than having a farmer on the land.